Since the bowl game for Louisville, multiple players have announced their departures from the program, both to the transfer portal and the NFL draft. On today's episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast, we are discussing each individual decision and how it plays an impact on next season. So with that being said, let's get right on into the show.
You are Locked On Louisville, your daily podcast on the Louisville Cardinals. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's going on, everyone? Welcome into another episode of the Locked On Louisville podcast. I'm your host, Dalton Pence. I want to take this time to personally thank you all for making us your first listen of the day. Just a reminder, the Locked On Louisville podcast, free and available wherever you get your podcasts. As I mentioned, something that has become a characteristic of the transfer portal era is it seems that players enter the portal in waves. You have your first wave right after the season, your second wave right after individual bowl games, and third wave right around spring training or spring practice. This isn't baseball, but multiple players have entered the portal from Louisville in that second wave of transfers, but seemingly the most important decision thus far has been Jarvis Brownlee entering the NFL draft. We'll also talk about the players that have entered the portal over the past couple days: Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, Vincent, Lumia, Jeff Clark, Keith Brown, and Rodney McGraw. So a lot of stuff to talk about, and we'll go ahead and get started discussing the NFL draft discussion. Obviously, there's a couple of players that we've been waiting on decisions from, right? Jawar Jordan and Jamari Thrash already entered the NFL draft. Ashton Gelati surprised some people and decided to return, and that left just a couple more decisions that we were keeping an eye out on. Obviously, Jarvis Brownlee, Quincy Riley, Jermaine Lole, and Isaac Guerrero. Well, one of those decisions was announced right after the bowl game, or a couple days after the bowl game. Star cornerback Jarvis Brownlee has decided to forego his last season of collegiate eligibility and try the NFL draft. And for me, I understand it. I also think that maybe another season might have helped his stock, but I see both sides of the equation here. For starters, I think that when Brownlee committed to Louisville, if you were telling me that these were going to be the two seasons that you would get from Brownlee, I would have been extremely ecstatic, because coming into his career here, I had my doubts. You talked with Florida State fans about, well, what kind of a player are you getting with Jarvis Brownlee? And you didn't have a lot of, or you didn't hear a lot of great things to say. I mean, obviously, I think that might be a little bit cliche when you talk about how an opposing fan base discusses one of their former players that leaves and obviously now goes to a conference rival at the time. But there were some legitimate concerns about coverage ability, gambling in coverage, etc. But I felt like for the most part, he struggled out of the gate in 2022, had a really forgettable performance against Florida State. But after that, he really started to pick up his play. And by the end of the year, he was one of Louisville's most reliable players on that defense that got better each and every game and was pretty respectable. This season, coming into the year, he was viewed as one of the leaders of this defense. And for the first part of the season, that rang true. He was absolutely phenomenal. Unfortunately, had an injury about halfway through the season and derailed his year. After having a career year in 2022, 2023 was going to be a money year for him. And I thought he started the season out pretty well. He picked his play up against Indiana and had a stretch where he played really well. He had the good game against Notre Dame where he had 5 tackles, 1 fumble recovery, and had an interception against Kentucky. But between the Notre Dame game and the season finale, and probably dealing with injury through the back half of the season, had to play with injury. And that sucks because it really starts to taint what we see on the field. And you think about how he played, but not often do you think about, well, he was battling injury as well. And it seemed like each and every week we were wondering, what is the status of Jarvis Brownlee's availability? And we didn't know from week to week. He played through injury. And I think that his 2 seasons at Louisville, I'm extremely appreciative for. I think that he exceeded my personal expectations. He was a starting cornerback in the ACC that was extremely reliable, not only in passing situations, but also defending the run. He was one of the best rushing defenders on the team at the cornerback position, which was fantastic, but brought that leadership, brought that tenacity in his play. It wasn't always perfect. I mean, there were plays to where he didn't necessarily do all that well, but that's every player, especially the cornerback position, which is arguably outside of quarterback, maybe one of the toughest positions to play in the sport. So I'm extremely grateful for his 2 seasons here. I honestly felt like this was the most 50-50 decision of the decisions remaining. I think that Riley and Garindo are probably leaning on going to the NFL. Jermaine Lole probably leaning on coming back. That is obviously 100% intuition, no inside information there. But I was expecting the Jarvis Brownlee decision to be one that made me believe that it was going either way. And that's what it turned out to be. At the end, I felt like he was ultimately maybe going to come back, but he decided to go pro. And I understand you want to go ahead and maybe maximize your NFL draft value as long as you can, because with an additional year, there's no guarantee that you are going to raise your draft value. At this point in time, I think Brownlee will probably project as a day 3, maybe undrafted free agent player in next April's draft, but I could see him testing pretty well with his measurables, with his speed. I could also see him, I could see an NFL team taking a chance on his ability to defend the run really well in the back half of the draft, round 6, round 7. So that's kind of where maybe a little bit of question was coming from me as to, okay, well, if you are projected day 3 or maybe undrafted free agency, why not come back for another year? But I also have to remind myself that, hey, look, at the end of the day, even if you perform well and you have a year to where it's sort of like a 2022 to where you are able to stay healthy and play good throughout the season, there's no guarantee that you're going to raise your stock as much as you should. And does it matter, truthfully, is there a huge difference between getting drafted in round 5 and round 7 in 2 different years? I think that maybe that answer is no. And at that point, maybe an undrafted free agency contract will allow you to pick the situation that you'd like to be in. You have a little bit more opportunity. I think it's probably more advantageous to a player to be drafted in that sense, or to have that opportunity rather be drafted in the 7th round. But you have more of an opportunity now to go to a situation that might be favorable for you. I mean, and who knows? Maybe he rises up boards, because we've seen that happen, and maybe a team views him higher than the traditional NFL mock drafts do, and we see that all the time. In no way am I saying that he's going to be in that realm of a day 3, but that seems like where he's projected at right now. But if he feels that this is the best decision for him, best of luck to him. Like I said, maybe he thought that it's hard to raise your stock considerably. That justifies using another year in college and, wasting a little bit more of your youth in the collegiate ranks. So in terms of what this means for the Cardinals, obviously they got a commitment from Florida defensive back Jalen Kimber. We'll talk about that on the next episode of the show. But it takes away a great cornerback option, and it 100% reemphasizes that you really, really have to go out and recruit the transfer portal well in terms of defensive back play. Right now you have 3 Power 5 transfers coming in, and you're probably going to need more starting level guys on the team to replace a guy like Jarvis Brownlee, who was extremely instrumental in not only defending the pass, but also in the rushing defense as well. And that's something that you don't always see a physical cornerback like Brownlee, who might have had his issues in coverage at times. But one thing you couldn't say is that he was shying away from contact, because he absolutely was a ball hunter and got to opposing running backs a lot. So, and opposing receivers and things like that. But ultimately, this is a move that it hurts. It definitely hurts next season, because, the chances of going out to the portal and getting a player like Brownlee, I mean, it can be tough. You don't always have the opportunity to go do so. There's not that many players out there that might have the upside of a Jarvis Brownlee, especially a player who played multiple years. But you hope that, maybe a Tay Galloway fits into that mix. I'm sorry, Tay Holloway. I keep mixing those two up. My apologies there. But you hope for a player like him, Corey Thornton, or even Jalen Kimber can rise into the mix and be able to replace that overall production. So that is the only player at the moment that the Cardinals have lost to the NFL draft. Over the next two segments, we'll talk about the players they lost to the portal over the past 72 hours, both on offense and defense. We'll start on offense, and one loss that I could see coming, but it still hurt nonetheless. And we'll discuss that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at eBay Motors. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay's Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, where you get your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. Hey, Cardinal fans, thanks again for making Locked On Louisville your first listen of this 2023 calendar year. Just a reminder that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Go to Locked On Sports Today on YouTube and subscribe to the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel. As I mentioned right before the break, there was a loss from the program, a player entering the portal that I sort of saw coming. A lot of people saw coming, but it still doesn't feel good nonetheless. It still hurts. That is Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, wide receiver that spent 3 years with the Cardinals program. We'll also talk about Vincent Lumia in this segment of the show, offensive line transfer that came from, I believe it was Duquesne, offensive tackle that joined the team. Really wasn't able to play all that much. But we'll start out with Ahmari Huggins-Bruce. And with the additions of guys like Ja'Cory Brooks, like Colin Lacey, I felt like the writing was on the wall for some of the receivers within the program. And I feel like you were looking at guys like maybe Kevin Coleman Jr., Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, the freshman, Kataris Hicks, Jaleel McClain, William Fowles, especially with an addition like Colin Lacey, who will play mainly in the slot for the Cardinals. And if you're Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, I understand, year 4 in a college program, you're not wanting to play rotational snaps in this spot of your career. You have 2 years, I believe it's 2 years remaining, if I'm not mistaken. No, actually only one left. So this really makes a ton of sense for Ahmari. I wish him the best of luck. Really wish it would have worked out here. I think that, two things can be true at one time. Number one, that he wasn't going to be the number one on the depth chart. That's going to be Ja'Cory Brooks. That's going to be Colin Lacey. That could be Kevin Coleman Jr. I think that the verdict is still out on if Louisville's going to take another wide receiver. I think that they're going to take multiple. And I don't think that Ahmari is going to be the only wide receiver to transfer out. You're going to see much more movement via the portal over the next couple weeks. So I think that number one, he wasn't going to be high up on the depth chart in terms of being a starter. And with one season left, you really haven't had an opportunity to show your skill set. It's probably best that you go elsewhere and get that opportunity. Number two, I just alluded to, he didn't really get the opportunity to show his skill set. I think that, playing 2 years under Scott Satterfield, run-heavy offense, didn't really maximize his skill set as a slot receiver, a guy who can get the ball in multiple different ways. And then this season, you saw the offense still be run dominant, but still try to spread the ball out more. A lot of targets went Jamari Thrash's way, and Ahmari Huggins-Bruce didn't get an opportunity really to break out. This was his worst season in terms of overall production. Had career lows in catches, receiving yards, but tied his career high in touchdown catches. 20 catches, 312 yards, and 4 touchdowns. It sucks because the potential is there. But I do think that this could be a situation where he flourishes in a different system, in a different situation where he's going to be maybe the go-to guy, one of the go-to guys for an opposing offense. And I think it works out for him. This is probably the best scenario, or best case scenario, or I won't say that. This is probably the best outcome for both parties. I think that Louisville is going to continue to revamp the wide receiver room via the portal. And I think that AHB now has the opportunity to go and show, what he can do with 1 year left in the college ranks. I wish him the best, man. I really appreciate his time here. He had some absolutely electric moments. I was extremely excited when he signed here. It felt like there was a chance where the Cardinals could lose him every offseason, and he stayed loyal here. And, heading into year 4 of his college career, it's time for him to go somewhere that's going to get him the ball a ton. And I just don't think that was going to be Louisville in 2024. So there's no shame. This is one of those situations to where it sucks that it's happening, but you feel like it's for the best. And I just wish him the best of luck. And I appreciate everything he did here. So I think that this is writing on the wall for the program that multiple wide receivers are probably going to be added to the portal. Ja'Cory Brooks, Colin Lacey, just the start for this group. I think that they're going to look to add some more proven guys via the portal. It wouldn't surprise me to see them add 2+. I think they're probably going to add 2, depending on how many more receivers enter the portal. But I, for the record, do not believe that Ahmari Huggins-Bruce is going to be the last wide receiver that we're going to see enter the portal from Louisville. So the other offensive player that entered the portal over the past couple of days was offensive lineman Vincent Lumia, transferred into the Cardinals program from Duquesne last offseason, and unfortunately just was the victim of a very crowded offensive line group, and he really wasn't able to see much time for the Cardinals. I think he only played 17 snaps or so, and all of those came against Murray State, if I'm not mistaken here. Spent 4 years with Duquesne, was an all Northeast Conference selection in 2021, 2022. And I had high hopes that he was going to be a rotational piece for the Cardinals in 23, just really didn't crack into that 2-deep rotation. And it doesn't surprise me that he also is going to go somewhere for his final year of eligibility to, showcase his skill set. I think that is maybe one of the good things about the transfer portal is that, you still have an opportunity to go out. And this is a guy that I think that there's a difference between players that have to sit behind a very talented and deep rotation 1 year and they transfer out after 1 year, and not necessarily saying they run from the grind, but they opt to go to a place where they're going to play automatically. Guys like Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, Vincent Lumia, they stick with it, they stay loyal, and they end up going to a spot, and hey, maybe it just doesn't work out, and they look to go elsewhere. In Vincent Lumia's case, so wish him the best of luck. It seems like the writing was going to be on the wall again in 2024 that he wasn't going to see much time. So this makes a ton of sense. But don't take my comments as being critical of players that go to the portal after 1 year. I know that players are fully able to do what they feel is best for their football careers, and I'm not bashing that at all. I'm just making the point of, Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, Vincent Lumia being one of those traditional guys that tries to develop at a spot, and they stick with it even though they might not necessarily be high up on the depth chart right away. So wish both of them the best of luck. There were 3 defensive players, and I have to say 2 of these 3 I was not expecting to enter the portal. Well, maybe 1, but we'll talk about which one entered the portal that I didn't think was going to happen, And we'll do that here momentarily after we talk about our friends over at PrizePicks. If you don't know what PrizePicks is, you should. It's the largest daily fantasy sports platform in North America. It's the easiest and most exciting way to play DFS. It's just you against the numbers instead of battling thousands of other players, including pros and sharks. You pick more than or less than on 2 to 6 player stat projections and watch the winnings roll in. With the basketball season here, you can now pick combo projections across football and basketball, meaning that you can go with LeBron James and Travis Kelce at a 10.5 combo of three-pointers made and receptions. If you want to play along some of PrizePicks' favorite players like rapper Meek Mill and comedian Andrew Schultz, you can now find community plays under the promos tab of the app to view entries from some of the biggest names in the PrizePicks community each week. Do yourself a favor. Check it out now. Go to prizepicks.com/lockedoncollege. Use the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. Once again, prizepicks.com using the code LockedOnCollege for a first deposit match up to $100. All right, heading into the final segment of the show, we're discussing 3 defensive players entering the portal for the Louisville Cardinals. That is Jeff Clark, Keith Brown, and Rodney McGraw. I think the main one for me that really took me off guard was Jeff Clark. I felt like he was going to be a player that was going to be in the plans for the 2024 season, had some solid moments for the team in 2023, but I do understand that with the additions of Thor Griffith, Jonathan Girard, it might make sense. The 6-foot, 290-pound native of Powder Springs, Georgia, spent the past 3 seasons before joining the Louisville program with Georgia State, spent the year with Louisville. And I think that this is sort of the common theme for this episode is that veteran guys with not many years of eligibility left are opting to go to a spot to where they are going to play and play a ton. And I think that the writing was on the wall for Jeff Clark, even though I was surprised by this decision and felt like he was going to be a rotational guy in 2024, that maybe he's looking for more. Obviously, he's looking to showcase his skill set. And even if you're a rotational player, sometimes that's going to be hard to do is showcase that skill set. So looking to go where he's going to play a ton of snaps is probably the best course of action for him. Didn't necessarily play a ton this season for the Cardinals, appeared in, I think, the majority of games, had 14 total tackles, obviously took a step back from his level of production from Georgia State where he had 39 in 2022. He didn't log a single sack this season, the first time in his career. But with seemingly a year of eligibility remaining, Jeff Clark opting to bet on himself and get an opportunity to, at the end of the day, make himself some money next year with another program. One that I wasn't really thinking about as a possibility, but it would make sense in the same sense, is Keith Brown. Keith Brown spent the past 2 years at Oregon, had trouble seeing the field as a former 4-star recruit, had a career year at 2022 with 21 total tackles and 1 sack. I had high expectations for him coming into the 2023 season. I honestly penciled him in as a starter when the Cardinals got his commitment last offseason. But the emergence of TJ Quinn, Jalen Alderman, Gilbert Frierson, and a couple other players, he was finding himself down the depth chart and had only 1 total tackle in 2023. And with a year of eligibility remaining, or maybe 2 years of eligibility remaining, looking at the game log this year, he only appeared in 1 game, had 1 tackle against Murray State. And it would make sense as to why he would go elsewhere, maybe even with the emergence of guys like Stanquan Clark, maybe TJ Capers in that room. Maybe he's thinking to himself, okay, how much playing time am I realistically going to get in 2024? And I'm just not necessarily sure to that answer, but I think it was probably along the lines of best case scenario being a rotational player. So, like I said, sort of the same situation with a guy like Jeff Clark is that you hate to see him go. But at the end of the day, this is a situation where Jeff Brom is going to do what's best for his program and try to maximize the opportunity at hand in 2024 with a 12-team playoff. But Lumia, Jeff Clark, Keith Brown all have one thing in common, is that they committed to the Cardinals last transfer portal offseason. And this next guy we're going to talk about is in the same category. That is Rodney McGraw, the transfer from Penn State. Ultimately, I thought that he was going to be a player that was a multiple-year guy. At Penn State as a freshman, only had one total tackle, the 6'6", 260-pound native of Chicago, Illinois, transferred from the Nittany Lions program to the Cardinals last offseason. And I was still expecting him to be a player that it was going to be, at least a year before he saw the field. And I think sort of like Jeff Clark on the defensive line, I think McGraw could play either on the edge or on the interior. I still think that I keep coming back to this phrase, the writing is on the wall. And that's sort of the case that, there's two sides to the story. The first side is that you're looking to improve your roster by any means necessary. But the other side, and the one that oftentimes is overlooked, is that, hey, there's players on your roster that are banking on next year potentially being a season to where they play a good amount of snaps. And if you go in and you go to the portal and you address the needs that you feel like you have to address and you bring guys in, well, you're also, risking losing some current players on your team. Now, maybe these were conversations that Jeff Brom, had the conversation with the players saying, hey, look, I appreciate your time here. I just want to let you know it's probably best that you look elsewhere because it's going to be a situation where you're probably not going to see a ton of the field in 2024. And that happens at every program. It could be that. It could be a mixture of both. It could be that the player just wants to go elsewhere, whatever may have you. But it makes sense that there was a wave of guys transferring out right after the bowl game. I do appreciate those guys having the, or making the decision to play the bowl game and not put the program in a terrible situation with having numbers or having issues for numbers. But, obviously the exit interviews as well for the program were probably conducted right after the game or just after the game, a couple days. But it is what it is. You never like to talk about player departures. On today's episode of the show, we talked about Jarvis Brownlee, Ahmari Huggins-Bruce, Vincent Lumia, Jeff Clark, Keith Brown, and Rodney McGraw. The final episode of the 2023 calendar year will air pretty shortly after this one, discussing the commitment of Florida defensive back Jalen Kimber. We'll also talk about Nick Scourton announcing his visit to Louisville on January 4th, and also the Cardinals going after a very, very good non-Power 5 running back that is in the portal. So we will discuss that on the next episode of the show. Thanks again for tuning in to the Locked On Louisville podcast. Just a reminder that the show is free and available on all streaming services, including YouTube. So be sure to stay tuned. Go Cards.